It is now 1 year since American journalist Evan Gershkovich was detained on a reporting trip in Russia. His best hope of release may be Vadim Krasikov, who is sitting in a German jail, convicted of an execution that was ordered by the Kremlin. Short presentational gray line. In the summer of 2013, a Moscow restaurant owner was gunned down in the Russian capital. A hooded man jumped off a bike and shot his victim twice before fleeing. 6 years later, an exiled Chechen commander, Zelimkhan Khangoshvili, was murdered in a busy Berlin park in eerily similar circumstances, shot by a man on a bike with a silenced Glock 26 in broad daylight. The assailant was arrested after dumping a pistol and wig in the river Spree close to the Reichstag, the building housing the German parliament. A passport bearing the name Vadim Sokolov was found on the Berlin assassin, but authorities quickly concluded that was not his name after all. The bald, strongly built man they had arrested was actually Vadim Krasikov, a Russian national with links to the FSB, the Russian security service, and the prime suspect in the 2013 murder in Moscow. In a recent interview with U.S. TV talk show host Tucker Carlson, Russia's President Vladimir Putin appeared to confirm reports that his country was seeking the release of the patriot Krasikov in exchange for American journalist Evan Gershkovich. This month marked 1 year since Mr. Gershkovich, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, was detained in Russia on espionage charges that are denied by him, his newspaper, and the U.S. government. Mr. Gershkovich isn't the only American in a Russian jail whose fate could be entwined with Krasikov's. Former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan and U.S. Russian citizen Alsu Kurmasheva are also detained in Russia on charges widely viewed as politically motivated. Even the late Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny, who was serving a 19-year prison sentence in Russia, was said to be part of a swap involving Krasikov before he died, according to his allies. Following the Russian election, President Putin said he had agreed to release Navalny in return for some people held in the West, but the White House said that was the first it had heard of any such deal. If President Putin's price stays the same, it means the most viable way of securing the release of the detained Americans would be a complex prisoner swap for Krasikov, needing the cooperation of Germany, the U.S., and Russia. Speaking to the BBC, German politician Roderick Kiesewetter said the deal would force Berlin into hostage diplomacy. So why does Putin seem so desperate to get Krasikov back? State-sanctioned killing. The first clues of a possible Kremlin hand in the Berlin murder come from Krasikov's background, or rather, the lack of one. Documents obtained by the Bellingcat investigative website show he was wanted over the 2013 Moscow murder. However, 2 years later, the arrest warrant was withdrawn and the Vadim Krasikov identity seemingly vanished into thin air. That is when Vadim Sokolov, age 45, appeared. In 2015, he got a passport and in 2019, a tax identification number. A German court concluded that this documentation could only be sanctioned by the Kremlin and therefore that Vadim Krasikov had state support for the Berlin murder. Russian state authorities ordered the accused to liquidate the victim, a German presiding judge said after sentencing Krasikov to life in prison. His victim, Zelimkhan Khangoshvili, was a Chechen rebel commander between 2000 and 2004, when Chechnya was fighting a war of independence against Russia. To Western observers, Mr. Khangoshvili seemed likely to be part of a string of Moscow-ordered assassinations of Chechen exiles in Europe and the Middle East. The Kremlin denied orchestrating the Berlin murder and dismissed the verdict against Krasikov as politically motivated. However, in his Tucker Carlson interview, President Putin appeared to make an admission when he said negotiations were underway for an exchange involving a Russian patriot who had eliminated a bandit in a European capital. Ulrich Lechte, who sits on the German government's Foreign Affairs Committee, told the BBC that President Putin's desire to retrieve Krasikov is a clear admission of guilt and shows how unscrupulously and unchallenged Russia has been able to act in our country. But Mark Galeotti said a potential deal says more about Russia's social contract with agents abroad than the value of Krasikov individually. Russia says, look, if you do get caught, we will get you back one way or the other. It may take a long time, but we will get you back, Mr. Galeotti said. That's very important for getting people to put themselves in potentially very dangerous situations. But whether Krasikov will ever be allowed back to Russia is ultimately up to the German government. The BBC approached 3 members of the government's Foreign Affairs Committee, all of whom oppose releasing Krasikov. Ulrich Lechta, whose Free Democratic Party is part of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's government, insisted that Germany must not do Russia this favor. This is a kind of amnesty and sends the political signal that Russia can commit further murders on our territory, which will then be released and thus remain unpunished. Mr. Lechta told the BBC, "It must not be allowed to prevail that foreign citizens are arbitrarily arrested in order to abuse them for a prisoner exchange." Jürgen Hart, from the Christian Democrats, said he didn't see any political support for rumored prisoner swaps involving Krasikov. Even if there was political will in Berlin to release Krasikov, the legal mechanics which could make that happen are murky. He could be pardoned by the president or deported to serve the remainder of his sentence in Russia, something that almost certainly wouldn't happen in light of Putin's comments. One case in point is the Russian merchant of death, Viktor Bout, an infamous arms dealer released from U.S. custody as part of a prisoner exchange with U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner. Bout has now pivoted to politics and won a seat at a local election in Russia. Nicola Beer, a German lawyer focusing on extradition law, told the BBC there is no legal mechanism that is really designed for this particular situation, so any move would be highly controversial and political. Anti-Kremlin political activist Bill Browder is now compiling a list of more than 50 Russian prisoners in Western countries who could be used as bargaining chips to free activists and journalists detained in Russia. Browder hopes the effort could help release British-Russian journalist Vladimir Kara-Murza, sentenced to 25 years in jail for treason for speaking out against the war in Ukraine, as well as Evan Gershkovich. Asked by the BBC whether his campaign played into hostage diplomacy, Browder conceded it is far from ideal but necessary to save lives. After Alexei Navalny's death, Browder said, "It's clear that other hostages are at risk of dying." Kindly like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments section.